Number 2, Dr Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question to the Minister of Finance: does he stand by all his statements?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, yes, and I particularly stand by my statement, which was originally made by the Prime Minister, in fact, that Budget 2014 is a confident budget for a confident country.
Supplementary question, Dr Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does he stand by his statement in this House on 14th of May last year that, quote, "It is important for New Zealand that we are regarded as a good credit risk"?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, that sounds like a very good statement the Minister of Finance would make.
Supplementary question, Dr Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given his acknowledgement that a good credit rating is important for New Zealand, is he concerned by Standard & Poor's warning last week that New Zealand's sovereign credit rating is at risk due to climate change?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, no. And the reason for that is that the government's books, which is the primary concern of the Standard & Poor's organisation, are actually moving positively into the black, that we will have the opportunity to repay debt, and we will reduce our debt as a percentage of GDP to 20% by 2019 and 20 on schedule. And in relation to any concerns about climate change, this government is doing a very strong program to mitigate the effects of climate change and become a less carbon-intense economy over time, while not jeopardising our ability to raise monies and pay off debt.
Supplementary question, Dr Russel Norman.
Is he aware that Moritz Kramer, Standard & Poor's chief sovereign risk analyst, has identified climate change as one of the century's 2 defining macroeconomic trends that are likely to put downward pressure on countries' sovereign credit ratings?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, that would depend on how the countries respond to those risks. And countries always have risks. If the member wants to go and look at some of the more recent data, he will see that New Zealand's carbon intensity is continuing to decline. In other words, the amount of carbon we produce as our economy grows is reducing as a percentage of GDP. That's a good thing and suggests that we are doing a good job as a country in mitigating the risk identified.
Supplementary question, Dr Russel Norman.
Given the Minister's answers, can we assume that he is not aware that Standard & Poor's has listed New Zealand's credit rating as particularly vulnerable to climate change because of the proportion of our population living on the coast and because of agriculture's role in our economy?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the first part of his question is no, we cannot assume that. And secondly, if the member is suggesting that New Zealand knocked the agricultural economy on the head to meet the needs of climate change, I imagine Standard & Poor's would have a view of that, and it wouldn't be positive.
Order. Supplementary question, Dr Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Will he now finally acknowledge the seriousness of climate change for New Zealand, where not only are the world's leading climate scientists saying our environment and our communities are at risk, but one of the world's largest rating agencies is also saying that our credit rating could suffer as a result of climate change?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I reject the implicit arrogance on the member's question that the government does not understand the importance of the risks of climate change. And actually, this government is focused on meeting all the fiscal risks that New Zealand faces. And actually, as he goes and has a look at the data, he will see the reducing intensity of New Zealand's carbon emissions as a percentage of our GDP, and that is something to be celebrated, and I'm confident will continue under this government.
Supplementary question, Dr Russel Norman.
Has the Minister gone and looked at the data, for example, Ministry for the Environment data, most recent data, which shows that the projections for New Zealand's net emissions is that they will increase by 50% over the next decade under current settings of this government? And does he believe that that is a responsible projection for New Zealand?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, we discussed in the previous question the issue of projections. What I can tell the member is actually what has occurred under this government is a decreasing intensity of carbon emissions as our economy grows. Now, the member may not like to know that, but actually that's true. We also have an increasing percentage of, for example, our electricity generation is in renewables. And actually this government's record on the environment, again, not something the Greens wants to talk about, is actually very good and compares favourably with the previous government.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
In light of official reports from his government showing a big increase in projected emissions ahead, will he take advice as to what should be the response of the government to Standard & Poor's report, which has identified New Zealand as vulnerable due to the number of New Zealanders likely to be impacted by sea level rise and due to the large contribution agriculture makes to our economy, and agriculture is particularly vulnerable to climate change?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, again, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, this government takes advice on those sorts of risks every day. And actually we have, for example, in the business growth agenda, a group of ministers in the natural resources area that grapples with these issues on an ongoing basis and actually makes decisions every day that mitigates those risks. And we will continue to do so. But if the member is suggesting, as I believe he may be, that we quickly shut down the agricultural industry so as to avoid that risk, I suspect that that's not something we'll agree about.
Question number 3, Honourable David Parker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.